back, Metroid fans, to the channel. We have a big update for Metroid Prime 4 in this video, along with updates on Retro Studios. We now finally have a clear idea of what direction Retro Studios is going with the graphics in Metroid Prime 4, and with proof to back it up in this video. So this will be a graphics preview of Metroid Prime 4, and not only that, but there is something extremely interesting that Retro Studios is working on that could be related to Metroid Prime 4, or could also be something directly related to Nintendo's next generation console itself. So stay tuned for that. First of all, before we begin, I have a very special announcement to make for you guys, and that is that we are doing a Metroid Dread Special Edition giveaway on this channel. Every single Metroid fan should want to own this, even if you already own the regular game itself for Metroid Dread. It's a near $100 value that comes with a steel game case, the game cartridge itself, 5 high quality art cards with key art for each 2D Metroid game, and a 190-page art book spanning all 5 entries in the 2D Metroid saga. This is basically a Metroid fan's dream collector's item. So how can you win this, you ask? Well, it's actually very easy. Here are the qualifications you need to follow in order to win Metroid Dread Special Edition for me, and I will ship it to you myself. So first of all, this Metroid Prime 4 video needs to have 750 likes. You need to be a subscriber to the Super Metal Dave 64 YouTube channel. You need to follow me on Twitter at smetaldave64, and leave a comment saying Metroid Dread SE, along with anything else you'd like to say as well. But those are the 4 qualifications that need to be followed in this video for you to have a chance to win Metroid Dread Special Edition. And the main reason I want you to follow me on Twitter is so I can DM you contact information as far as shipping is concerned for the item if you do win. And I'll announce the winner on Twitter or here on the channel soon after the goals are met, and I'll give it a month or so just to make sure everyone gets a chance. This is my way of celebrating Metroid Dread's Game of the Year nomination and thanking you guys for the support. So now, Metroid Prime 4. Of course, we do expect to see Metroid Prime Trilogy before the release of Metroid Prime 4, but this update from Retro Studios will apply to Prime 4 and even games coming after Metroid Prime 4, since Prime Trilogy would be remastered games for either the current Switch or next-gen Switch coming in the not-too-distant future. Also, if you recall back in 2019, after Retro Studios took over development for Metroid Prime 4, they started hiring developers with extremely high profiles in AAA big budget development for games that were known for pushing the boundaries of graphics. So now, Retro Studios is going all out to get the best of the best here in this new update. And it directly gives us an idea of how good this game is going to look. And I'm not kidding here, guys. Retro Studios isn't messing around, and we'll go over exactly what they're doing right now and then explain with visual examples of the graphics that we could be expecting in Metroid Prime 4 in this graphics preview. Retro Studios is hiring a material artist, which is an extremely important position for adding the extra high detailed textures and graphics on objects and characters. But if you look at what they're asking for, we get an even better idea, and here's a portion of it, just a small portion because it's a very long description of what they're looking for, and I'll leave all of that in the description with links, of course, that you can look at for yourself. So here's what they're looking for. It says, creates high quality physically based materials using Substance Designer and Painter to establish visual targets and support art efforts across all game content. Remember that, all game content. Then it says establishes organized material workflows in Substance Designer and Painter, collaborates in implementing and maintaining material pipelines, collaborates with other artists to build and integrate assets into visually consistent, high quality, and optimized environment art. Expert skills in Substance Designer and Painter, solid understanding of PBR, physically based rendering and interaction between materials and lighting, a portfolio demonstrating a wide variety of tiled and one-to-one materials created using both procedural and 3D sculpted techniques, experience with high poly sculpting and modeling software such as ZBrush and Maya. So I know that is a lot of information to look at and you want to know what that all means, but it's actually quite simple when you find out exactly what is going on with these qualifications that are being asked for in regards to other games that have used them. And remember, they asked for an expert in their skill with Substance Designer and Painter and using high quality physically based rendering across all game content. So not just their current projects, which would be Metroid Prime 4, but also all their future games as well. Obviously, when they hire someone, they want them to work there, not just for one game usually, but for a long time. So a perfect example to show you guys is Uncharted 4 and its graphics from 2016 from a Naughty Dog presentation at GDC, the Game Developers Conference in that year, where they talked about how they used to great effect Substance Designer and Substance Painter to create the high quality detailed assets in that game to make it look so real, using physically based rendering PBR in order to achieve the graphics in that game that were heralded at the time as being some of the best ever seen in a video game, and of course that was 5 years ago. But take a look at this very brief, it's about a minute and a half presentation clip from there, and you'll see what I mean with the type of graphics that we could be expecting for Metroid Prime 4, and then we will discuss after.
And here Rogelio has some great fully procedural tiling materials from Substance Designer, and there's another one, some rough cobblestones. And here's an example of mostly fully procedural textures in the context of an architectural level, and then again, but in an organic context. So what we could achieve with Substance Designer was very broad and diverse. And like most of you are probably already familiar with, we were adopting physically based rendering, so of course consistency and library materials were very important to us. And as were material layering and inheritance. We wanted robust libraries that artists could utilize quickly. So naturally, as you may know, Uncharted is a very stylized but hyper-real environment, and we hand sculpt and paint a lot of things. There's a lot of pride and work that goes into every asset. So it was natural to start in our ZBrush pipeline, and we simply took our height maps out of ZBrush. We brought everything into Substance Designer, generated all of our material maps, and then blended our materials in Engine. And that was very straightforward. We could see that was very efficient. Said, okay, well that's great. Now let's take those maps and now let's prototype our material pipeline. So let's look at how we can combine materials together, not just blend them, but find interesting ways to achieve material effects like this rusted paint you see on the right.
So there you have it from Naughty Dog themselves from 5 years ago, them pioneering the use of Substance Designer and Substance Painter to create these amazing looking assets and materials in games like with Uncharted 4, and of course there are other games they use it in as well, Uncharted Lost Legacy and The Last of Us Part 2. They could no doubt be considered experts in using Substance Designer and Painter to achieve that type of content and graphics in their games, just like with what Retro Studios is asking for this qualification, someone who's an expert at using that to create those high quality assets and models. Now taking a step back for a moment, when you consider the best looking Nintendo Switch games currently on the market, which I consider to be Crysis Remastered, Crysis 3, and Doom Eternal, which of course are all AAA third-party games, not Nintendo's first-party games, since usually Nintendo's first-party games are focused on much less realistic looking graphics, whereas the games I mentioned with Crysis, Crysis 3, Doom Eternal, and some other AAA games on the Switch, they do highlight more realistic looking graphics and more realistic effects as far as light and shading, for example, to make them look more real on the current Nintendo Switch hardware. But one very interesting thing to take a note on is that for current Switch games and ports of these realistic looking games, for the most part, these small minute details like the actual detailed looks of textures and things you get up close to them on games, they are missing on Switch games in general. Usually a lot of sacrifices in those small details have to be made in order for a port to work at all on the Switch. But the current Switch is in fact capable of doing most of the modern effects that developers are using, except for ray tracing. But things like global illumination, for example, is used in the Crysis ports on the Switch, and when it's used in the right way, like in Jedi Fallen Order, where they were using the lightsaber to light the room, it can look very convincing for a lighting situation in combination with things like screen space reflection, which the Switch can also do as well to a lesser degree, but the Switch can do basically everything except for ray tracing on the current hardware. So this takes us back to Metroid Prime 4. The question is, why would Retro Studios be hiring a developer for materials for such high quality assets, something that be along the lines of an Uncharted 4 in terms of how they're doing those types of assets? That's the kind of people that they're looking for Metroid Prime 4 and future games at Retro Studios, no doubt. So when considering the current Nintendo Switch, what I do think is very possible is that Nintendo will have a separate team possibly help port the Nintendo Switch version of Metroid Prime 4, if they do in fact release it still on the Switch when the game is finally released, because I do think Metroid Prime 4 may in fact be heading into the 2023 year territory, but we'll talk about that more in a moment. However, since Retro Studios is obviously looking for an extremely detailed game to be made here, it's most likely going to require a lot more system RAM in order for them to achieve that type of detail that they want to have in this game. Like for example with Uncharted 4, Naughty Dog made all that work on the base model 2013 PlayStation 4, which by today's standards is a very underpowered console at 1.8 teraflops, but the big help that the console had was 8GB of GDDR5 RAM, which is double the amount the Switch has, but it's also a faster RAM with way more bandwidth than the Switch has with its LPDDR4. Which is one of the big reasons why Naughty Dog was able to create games on the PS4 much more detailed than the current Nintendo Switch is, because of that extra RAM and bandwidth. Not to mention having a better GPU and CPU on top of that. Now that's not to say that the Switch OG version of Metroid Prime 4 will look bad or anything. I do think it could look very, very good on the Nintendo Switch, the current Switch, with the right amount of work put into it. But my expectation would be something similar along the lines and quality of a Crysis 3 or a Doom Eternal kind of look, with downgraded textures from Retro Studios' original target specs that they're going for, and likely having a dynamic 720p 30 frames per second, which a lot of Switch games run at already. And with the Retro Studios' amazing artists and talent that they have over there, the game would likely keep its overall style and look on the current Nintendo Switch, with all the extra detail going over to a more powerful Switch or next gen Switch that Nintendo will most likely have out by the time Metroid Prime 4 is released to the public. And we also know that Metroid Prime, the series, always has ran at 60 frames per second, which is their target frame rate for their games ever since the game first came out on GameCube in 2002. So if they have to sacrifice the frame rate to get it to 720p and 30 frames on the current Switch, no doubt the next gen Switch version that they'll be releasing will be targeting 60 frames per second, 1080p or higher basically on that console. No doubt by that time, and the technology will already be there. It's already been there for years, as we discussed on this channel for the past few years. The mobile technology has advanced to the point where they can have games that look like PS4 quality on the go. And as we know, with the Steam Deck coming out in just a few months, that's more than possible at a good price. And the games look fantastic. Obviously it's a PC. You can run games like Cyberpunk 2077 on the go on the Steam Deck with decent looking quality. And getting back to the release date for Metroid Prime 4, with Metroid Dread coming out in 2021, we still need to have Metroid Prime Trilogy, so I do think that's going to be a 2022 game, with all three games coming out in one bundle, as it should, which leaves the possible debut of Metroid Prime 4 to be sometime in 2022, with the release in 2023, making it a yearly event for Metroid every single year for the next 3 years, 2021, 2022, and 2023. But we also have another very interesting thing that Retro Studios is hiring for, and that is a user interface scripter and user interface artist, which is UI, user interface, right? And it's very interesting because it looks like they could be designing something with this UI for Nintendo's next generation console, quite possibly to integrate what they're working on with Metroid Prime or Metroid Prime 4 into the UI, similar to what PlayStation has done with their games with the PlayStation 5 and the games, how they seamlessly integrate with the UI. And for this, of course, I will leave in the description all the links for you to take a look at for yourself. But for the UI scripter in particular, take a look real briefly at just some of the things Retro Studios is asking for here, and you can discuss this in the comment section as well. They're asking for someone who participates in determining technical approaches to UI features and in developing new or enhanced UI workflows. Works closely with UI artists, designers, and engineers to create and implement menus and HUDs using visual scripting. Participates in developing prototypes and experiments for UI features. Identifies needs and purposes long-term scalable solutions to UI challenges. Console experience, especially Wii U or Nintendo Switch. So that's very interesting, right? So when I first saw this, I thought maybe this could just be them working on the UI for Metroid Prime 4 or Metroid Prime Trilogy to make it work, but this seems much more involved than that, like they're designing a brand new UI for possibly a new console. Or at the very least, some kind of gigantic system update for the current Nintendo Switch that they'll totally change the UI into something different and to have it integrated with the game. Very similar to what PlayStation has done with PS5, like we said before. It seems like they're hinting at something like that they want to do do some kind of integration with the UI and the games with the console. And it's very interesting to talk about the Wii U as well, because the Wii U was very forward thinking in how its UI was integrated with the console and the gamepad. You had the Miiverse functionality within the game where you basically would click on something and you would get the message come up in the gamepad and it would actually interact with the game itself. And the PlayStation 5 actually reminds me of that type of UI interface, just much faster and more seamless, of course. Overall, this does sound like Nintendo may have asked Retro Studios to hire some people to help them design some type of UI ideas, at least, maybe for a new next generation console. We'll have to wait and see. We don't know for sure. That's just my guess, but either it's for the current Switch, or it's for Metroid Prime 4, or it's for next generation Switch. Either way, they're designing something with UI, something brand new to integrate with their games with the console. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what that is, but it's very exciting to see. And if Nintendo does go back to something along the lines as the Wii U, as far as how the UI works and everything, all those little ideas they had, and have it more streamlined and faster, I do think it'd be a really awesome experience to have. Much better than the current bare bones approach with the Nintendo Switch as it stands right now. But it's a lot of very interesting and exciting things going on here with Retro Studios, no doubt. Let me know what you think about all this in the comment section, guys. It's definitely an exciting time for Metroid and Metroid Prime 4 and its potential. Be sure to hit the like button so we can get at least 750 likes, so more people can have the opportunity to win that special edition of Metroid Dread, and I'm really excited to be giving it away to one of you guys. So you guys really deserve it. The Metroid community has definitely been through some difficult times for the past few years before 2021, but now the time has finally come where the series is back in the spotlight in a big way. So let's keep it going with the inevitable release of Metroid Prime Trilogy, and of course the biggest game Retro Studios has ever developed by far in Metroid Prime 4.